Welcome to the Weekly Bioanalysis, a KCAS podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the 42nd episode of the Weekly Bioanalysis, the official podcast of KCAS Bioanalytical and Biomarker Services. KCAS is a bioanalytical CRO serving the pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical industries for over 40 years. My name is John Perkins, and I have been in bioanalytical LCMS space for over 26 years. I'm here with my co-host, Dominic Marino.
Hello, my name is Dominic Marino, and I've been in the LBA and biomarker space for a little over 27 years.
Dominic and I are senior scientific advisors at KCAS, and either or both of us are available to answer any questions you may have regarding this podcast or any of KCAS's services. I'm located in upstate New York, Dominic is in Kansas, and our producers are in Missouri and Kansas City, so we're all over the map. We're thrilled to have you listening to the 42nd episode of the podcast, which is now available virtually everywhere. Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon, and many others. Wherever you choose to find or play your podcast, you can now likely find the Weekly Bioanalysis. We welcome all of you, whether you are joining us for the first time or if you're a regular listener. As many of you know, if you've listened to any of our previous episodes, we started the podcast when COVID restrictions prevented us from continuing business as usual. We were unable to meet colleagues face-to-face, but we wanted to continue communicating with all of them and you. The podcast was an idea we'd always had, but it suddenly became the perfect medium for us to employ. Today's podcast will be a review of the latest news and resources, and then a focus on the topic of our choosing before discussing any feedback we've had from you. We're constantly looking for topics, and we'd be happy to discuss something that you want us to cover. Then we'll wrap up and give you a little teaser for the next episode, letting you know what is coming in the future. So again, we're fired up to have you here, and we're looking forward to a fun episode today. To kick us off for podcast number 42, Dom is going to go over today's podcast topic a bit before we jump into the news and resources section. Dominic.
Yeah, John, thanks. And it's we're fired up. That's how you do that one. No, I'm just
Yeah,
kidding. I'm playing with you, John.
I'm much more chilled about the firing up. I mean, it's...
No, that's an old football guy that comes to mind when I say it. So anyhow, John, really jam-packed show. Got a lot of news. There's been so much news going on, not just COVID, non-COVID. There's all sorts of good stuff. But the main portion, state of play with vaccines. So the up and coming and the next generation historic perspective. So a little bit of an update on what's happening both with current vaccines. We'll talk about therapeutics, specifically some antibody therapeutics, and then what's the next wave of vaccines. So we want to be a little proactive and kind of share with how we're going to really squelch this pandemic and any future pandemics, right, John? So jam-packed show. Excited to get started. Let's get kicking off with the news. And the first news article we're going to go over is about how the pharma drug industry is naming, right? So the naming of COVID-19 variants. So they're applauding WHO's choice of Greek alphabet, right, John? So, kind of how hurricanes go about naming. We are clever in the pharma industry. We're going to use the Greek alphabet for naming of COVID-19 variants. And WHO's got a clever way of doing this, John. They're going to try to standardize it because we're tired of saying things like B1.1.7 variant and the UK variant and the South African variant and this and that. So we're going to kind of give it some nomenclature to help us maybe streamline it a little bit, and also so that we're not kind of offending anybody with sort of variants and stuff, right, John?
Yeah,
So
I think a lot of it is to help make things easier for people who non-scientists and media, etc. And there's definitely the finger pointing associated with whatever region it comes from. And the Spanish flu is a great example of that, where they're not really sure where Spanish flu originated, but because Spain was a neutral country in World War I when the flu actually started across the globe, their news organizations weren't tamped down like other countries, because other countries were sort of not letting any bad news out. The King of Spain got sick, and so it was a big thing in the media, and therefore, so when the media reported it, other countries thought, oh, they've got this flu in Spain, it must be where it originated, and became known as the Spanish flu, whereas the first known case was actually in Kansas in the US. Not saying it originated in Kansas, but it's interesting how these sort of misnomers can happen. So to go with the way of the alpha, beta, gamma, delta, etc., takes away all that, pointing the finger. But again, actually, every news article I looked at as in building up to this podcast still refers to the variant from the UK, the variant from South Africa, the variant from India. So there's a way to go in terms of transitioning from the geographical origins to the letters, but it is a good move. And
it'll take a long time, John. Right? Like,
exactly.
so
Yes.
a couple, just a sidebar here. The flow cytometry field, they sort of this is going back a ways, but they had all these sorts of markers on surfaces that they just called them whatever. A lot of times it was whoever discovered it got to name it and so forth. But then they streamlined it to CD1, 2, and you've heard CD3, 4, 5, and all that. But that took I remember some of that. It took a good, I don't know, 4 or 5 years before people stopped calling it by its original. Instead of the T cell receptor, they said CD3. So it's going to take some time, but I do think it's important because, like you just said, the Spanish flu is a complete misnomer. It should be the French flu, and maybe it even should be the Kansas flu.
Absolutely.
So that type of stuff, and it's but this is a good article, and one that I think over time we certainly do hope that we don't have to refer to it as UK and Brazilian
and I think it's also important that to put this precedent in place, because this is unlikely to be the last pandemic we come up against. And if that next pandemic evolves the same way as this does, you do need that system in place to address it.
I'm cautiously optimistic that whatever comes in the future, we're not. Well, anyway, let's move on from that.
Well, we touched on that later. I mean, there's obviously going to be more. I think this has been educational dealing with this pandemic as to hopefully we learn the lessons and it helps lead us into how we deal with the next pandemic or prepare for the next pandemic before it even hits. So I'm hoping that, and there are items throughout this podcast that talk about things in terms of how adaptable some of the technology that people are working on can address future variants and future pandemics, etc.
Yeah, well, what I hope is people aren't waiting for it. Like,
you
gotta live, right? I know you're not, John, but I think there's a lot of people who are like, oh, I'm fearful of the next pandemic, but I'm like, anyway, we'll talk a little bit more about how life is sort of returning to normalcy. But hey, John, we're going to move on to the next one. This is great. I love this. This is San Marino takes a shot at vaccine tourism. So, John, I think this is kind of a clever idea around how they're, this to me is a creative little story about, if you want to come visit us, maybe you got to roll your sleeve up, right? So what is this all about? Which I think is going to happen, maybe happen. I don't know. I'm torn about what this all means, although
I think it's one of those things. It's reflective of man's ingenuity, but also there's a little bit of it's a little bit off. Anyway, the backstory is San Marino, third smallest country in Europe, and you don't really hear about San Marino very much, apart from every 2 or 4 years in the qualifiers for the Euros or the World Cup, where they become the whipping boys for the bigger teams in Europe. And then, as a tax haven, as a kid, I collected stamps, and so it was you San Marino stamps. They were there like bright and shiny things to attract children. Anyway, what San Marino have actually, they have a supply of the Sputnik 5 vaccine from Russia. And so they're taking advantage of the fact that they're close to inoculating most of their population, which is it's in the tens of thousands. And so they're offering Sputnik 5 doses to tourists from countries that are currently struggling to distribute their vaccines. So in the article, they cited people from Czechia and Germany. There's about 250 people have actually taken advantage of the offer, where they'll come and they'll stay at a hotel. The hotel arranges the paperwork. They keep them there for 3 days. Then the tourist goes off again. Then the 3 weeks time for the second shot, they come back, stay at the same hotel, and they're all sort of escorted through it. So it's part of San Marino's attempt to address the slump in tourism, because obviously COVID has drastically impacted tourist industries. So yeah, on one level it really is brilliant. On another level, you do think, it's a little bit. I'm not sure about this, but
a little evasive, a little Orson Welles-ish, I guess, comes to mind. But it's a fascinating read. And John, I didn't realize how risk averse the French were to. They're very skeptical, right? About
sure, yeah.
The population doesn't want to get vaccinated. So what a clever little thing to say, hey, we're, even they're going to sustain. San Marino is going to cleverly has said, hey, we're open for business.
Yeah.
Just
So
come get a shot. Yeah. So.
yes, it's basically open to everyone apart from Italians, because obviously San Marino is right in the middle of Italy, so they're not encouraging Italians to come in, but certainly foreign visitors from outside Italy are welcome. Actually,
No, I mean, you do.
as an aside, I was actually. Have you ever seen pictures of San Marino? It's really pretty.
I have not.
And when last year around January February 2020, when I was thinking about going to EBF in November, I actually was planning to have a week in northern Italy beforehand, visiting like car museums, or because there's a lot of like car designers
Sure.
in Italy.
Sure.
And because it was all northern Italy, I actually, in looking at the trains, I could actually fit San Marino into the trip too. So I was going to try and attach that into it, and obviously COVID took over and it never happened. So it's still on my to-do list. I would love to get it, but it's very pretty in terms of the photos and things I've seen. So at some point I'll manage it. But let's
Yeah,
move
no,
on.
I love it. Any creative things are, this is it sounds like it's a state that is, or a country that's very much dependent upon tourism. Obviously, COVID shut it down and they're combating it, and
Yeah, sure.
good for them.
Yeah.
So John, we've had a couple feel good stories, but man,
The
the
next
next
one,
couple stories, the
next,
news,
next
John, I can't believe what's happening in the news, but go ahead and kick
this
us off on this one. This is a
Yeah,
fascinating
this
one.
this 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 really to me illustrates, if you read something online, check multiple sources to make sure that what you've read the first time is actually correct. But the
Mm.
headline is, French influencers targeted a misinformation campaign against the Pfizer vaccine. And basically, what this is, French social media influencers, I think mainly was it on Instagram? I'm not sure which. But anyway, it doesn't matter. French social media influencers were approached by um, a group that the groups said it was a British communications agency, and they said they had information that discredited the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine, and they basically were offered payment for putting this misinformation out there. And again, this is from multiple reports, so there's a number of outlets have reported on this, and they were actually offered €2,000 to post misleading information, and the theme of what they were saying was the email asked influencers to explain why the death rate among patients who received the Pfizer jab is almost 3 times higher than the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is absolute garbage. And I think in terms of tracing this back, it actually traces the address in London is I think a false address. Yeah, it's a fake address, and so they're thinking it actually goes back to Russia and a misinformation campaign. Um, uh, Going from there, and this actually goes to your skepticism in France. They picked on France because there's a lot of vaccine skepticism in France, so they almost have like a fertile market to tap into
Yeah,
to really plant this. So yeah,
it's
it really
unbelievable.
nasty. Yeah, so I'll let you
It's
go.
incredible,
Yeah.
right? Like, so they're saying it might be China as well, but who knows,
Mhm.
right? So you just, bad people do bad things, and like this is a classic example of, and really you start thinking like, why would someone portray Pfizer as having 3 times the death rate of AstraZeneca? It sounds like somebody's trying to promote AstraZeneca, but these things sway markets and
Yeah,
dollars
yeah.
big time. This is, I mean, these are, like you said, like it's so hard to read something online and not try to cross reference it. It's like you have to be your own, kind of, you have to do your own due diligence on what you read online. But what a crazy story to think that somebody's getting €2,000, which is, I mean, John, that they can. I'm sure a lot of people were taking advantage of this, right? To sit there and say, "Oh, hey, why is this to promote this falsehood?" And I think there's a lot of this,
Well, the
John. But
the, the trouble
but
is, yeah,
I'll say this: it seemed like our industry had almost been. Maybe I was naive, right? I thought our industry was above this,
hmm
or sort of had been immune to it. But clearly, and John, we got more stories coming, right? This one
sure.
is one that, to me, is more dollars. Um, some of them, though, that we're going to touch on them in a little bit, they really surprisingly can affect patients as well as just healthcare workers in general.
True.
So,
Yeah.
but I'll let you kind of
Well,
end on this one. But I mean, it's making my head hurt a little bit to think that, like, what can you trust?
Well, I think is the real problem with social media, that a lot of it, the people that shout loudest sort of get amplified, and definitely you get little echo chambers, be it on Twitter, Facebook, or whatever, and people who really know nothing about a particular subject can say a lot, and it just takes on a life of its own, and I think that sort of then trying to rebut false information is much more
Yeah.
difficult than
There's
propagating the false information, and this is the struggle you're up against with
and
social
even
media.
as I sit here, I think there's still people who believe we're using like fetal cells in our vaccines, and it's just not true, right?
True,
Like
absolutely. Yeah,
that
I
popped
mean,
up. I think someone asked me that the other day, like, "Oh, aren't all these vaccines?" I'm like, "Oh boy." So anyhow, John, great stuff, and man, I think we're starting to get into what I'll call a dark turn, right, John? Where
yeah,
boy, this the next two make me a little. But anyhow, the next
yeah.
article is about
If I can just
we,
say, yeah, I mean, basically, we
sure.
put this agenda together, and like 2 days ago, it looked, oh, this is gonna be really good fun to talk about, and then these other things hit, and it's like, oh my god, this is really, it's the dark podcast. But I'll let you take this next one.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's even like as COVID's being lifted, where crime is spiking everywhere, and good Lord, I guess we're not immune to it. But what this article talks about is as COVID-19 has exacerbated violence in the workplace, and there's one healthcare system that's using some discrete wearables to protect staff. So think about this. They go on to talk about how the healthcare workers were 5 times as likely to experience a workplace violence back in 2018, right? So then John, it never even crossed my mind that there might be nurses and doctors who were getting accosted as we were emerging in COVID, right? And it makes sense. Think about it. It's suddenly like, oh, you can't see your dying father,
Mhm.
or
Yes,
you
yes,
can't. So it struck me as like, oh my goodness. And I haven't had a chance to actually ask my sister about this, but she has said the hospital. When I was with her, I got to see her a couple weeks ago, but she did mention how things are changing and evolving, and I want to ask her about this, but I'll let you jump in because I got more thoughts on this. But
yeah.
goodness gracious, this is like it makes total sense when you think about it on the surface because people are, I mean, hospitals are already a trying place. Suddenly, you're just being ripped apart from your
Yeah,
family. You don't know what's happening, so it's just
yeah.
it makes me ache.
Yeah, and particularly in COVID, I mean, we've had these spikes in cases where obviously then the medical staff all get stressed. I'm not placing any blame on them, but again, if they're trying to deal with family, they're not necessarily communicating as well as they would normally because they're stressed. But I think that it's just the whole stress across the board, and anyone who takes out on a medical professional, there's something wrong with them. I mean, that these people are their job is to help people to actually. I mean, like
Yeah,
you said, when 5 times more likely as of 2018 to have a workplace violence injury compared to other people. That's just insane to me. And obviously, COVID has spiked that up. Just to touch back on the article, the actual what Bassett Healthcare have given their people a wearable emergency alert system across its hospitals, offices, and other settings. So it's basically Bluetooth based, and it allows their caregivers and supporting staff to discreetly call for assistance from co-workers, security teams, and potentially law enforcement if they're
yeah,
attacked. And it's like it's basically it's a push button that immediately they're being located. They're not being tracked at the rest of the time because there's privacy concerns to this. But as soon as they push that button, then the system kicks into action to track them down and obviously help them out. I think, I mean, it's a horrible comment on society that they need to do this, but I do applaud Bassett for implementing this because obviously safety of your people is paramount. I think we touch on this, and then there's a little addendum to this. So if you want to say more that you want
sure.
to comment on
Yeah,
this.
I think it's important to, it's like the fallen and I can't get up type of device. It's real
Mhm.
small. You can wear it around your neck. It looks like some people put it on a lantern or something, but it's a real small device. I think if I'm a healthcare worker, I absolutely want one of these things. I think it's wonderful. I would imagine this is sort of no different than a radiation badge in time. This will just be something that
Sure.
becomes part of the scrubs. I think it's warranted. I mean, just to hear that, in 2018, good, who knows where it's at now. It does make you think of how violent a society we are. But in the same setting, John, I just think there's some stresses, and you touched on it. I'm not blaming anybody but you could see an exhausted, stressed out healthcare worker maybe saying or doing something that could provoke somebody who's already on edge. So it's just a perfect storm for this. And
Sure.
I don't think anybody would worry about being tracked, and I'm not worried about, I don't think people are too worried about that. I think it's a great, hats off to Bassett Healthcare. And I think anything we can do to help nurses and clinicians and healthcare workers just feel more comfortable. Of course, I'm sure there's a good percentage of them that feel like this is, kind of big brother issue, but whatever is needed to make sure you can walk into a hospital and not have to worry about it, right? I
And,
didn't
and
didn't
not,
even cross my mind. I've never thought about it, but it makes a lot of sense.
not so much walk into the hospital, to be able to walk out in one piece
Yeah,
as well. I mean, that's really the key.
and it's funny. I have been in an emergency room where fights have broken out and just weird things. When you think about it, it's not that uncommon for, and you always see a heavy police influence at hospitals. But now this should really be just good all around. I think even like, remember they're open 24/7, 365. So I think it even comes with like walking to your car at night should make you feel a
Sure.
little
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
comfortable.
Yeah. So the addendum to this is basically there's a recently formed collective of large health system CEOs advocating them for committing to various workforce safety efforts, obviously to help in this kind of situation. And there's a number of Cleveland Clinic, Intermountain Healthcare, Mass General, Brigham, Providence, and other organizations are calling for a renewed focus on protecting employees' psychological, emotional, and physical safety. It's also been looked at in Congress as well to look at creating a federal standard requiring healthcare and social service employers to implement workplace violence prevention plans. So it's not just in this one case of the button, but there is a wider initiative to hopefully address this problem. So
Yeah, not surprising.
help it in
I
the
think
long term. Absolutely has to be. Yeah.
I think over time we'll see more and more of this, John. We'll keep an eye out for it, but I think you will see some sort of, like, you could even think an app or eventually something, but an evolution of this where we want to protect people that are in a 24 365 hour, hospitals are open constantly, so the more you can monitor, I think the better.
Yep.
John, we started with a couple good, I thought, good positive sort of news, and we're going to go on to the last one. We had a couple that were a little darker, but this last one, John, I mean, it's probably it kind of pains us
Well,
to
we
talk
yeah,
about it.
yeah. I actually, in putting this all together, I really debated whether to include this or not because
Yeah.
but then thought, well, we talked about it when it actually happened in the early stages of vaccine rollout, and this is the ex-Wisconsin pharmacist gets prison for ruining vaccine, and the story was that he basically it was at the time we knew that there were stability issues with the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines. So he purposely left out a number of Moderna doses, so they went beyond their stability window, and so they should have been unusable. It wasn't caught immediately, so most of these doses that were affected by this were thrown away by the Aurora healthcare system that he worked for. But there were actually 57 people dosed with it. So these people have been dosed with the vaccine. They don't know if it's effective. So that causes all sorts of turmoil for
Oh,
them.
nightmare. Imagine
And
getting a call saying, oh, somebody
yeah,
maliciously screwed up your vaccine. Right? We're all
yeah.
a little hesitant to go in, and then you have this. But go on, John. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, so basically, this guy, and I'm going to name him because it's disgusting. He was Stephen Brandenburg, pleaded guilty in February to 2 felony counts of attempting to tamper with a consumer product. He admitted to intentionally removing the doses manufactured by Moderna from a refrigerator for hours at this Aurora Medical Center. So obviously, it's dealt with by Aurora, and he is going to prison for I think 3 years. But there's more to him than that, and
Yeah,
I'll let you comment on
yeah.
that.
So you're right. I mean, the first thing that strikes me is he maliciously, tampered with these, let them come to room temperature, essentially potentially rendering them ineffective. And mind you, this was back in February when we were just trying to roll out vaccines, and there weren't a lot of them, or at least not a lot of, we're still trying to early on in the crusade here.
Sure.
And but then I think really some of what makes, what's motivating this individual is immediately what I sort of thought, why is he doing this?
Yep.
And John, I'm going to let you tell it, because it's almost like hard to believe that. Well, I'm going to stop that. I guess people have beliefs that are not mine, and you need to be respectful of them. But tell us a little bit about
Well,
Mr. Brandenburg and his
yeah.
conspiracy thoughts.
So, I mean, it really does relate back to what we said about the French story, where it's, you got that echo chamber on social media sites, etc. Well, I mean, one thing even before that, I mean, he actually admitted to when he was asked to take the flu vaccine, he substituted saline for that,
Yeah.
so he wasn't given the vaccine, and actually tried to persuade fellow co-workers to do the same.
So
And
hey,
then,
I want to take a moment there. So
yes,
that was already an early warning sign, right? So
sure,
this
yep.
individual, Brandenburg here, he substituted saline for the flu vaccine because he thought he's kind of an anti-vaxxer,
He's
really.
an anti-vaxxer,
But
absolutely,
that's
yeah.
crazy. I mean, how do we? Okay, John, just if you're an anti-vaxxer, go work somewhere else.
And this is what it's. I don't want to spend too long on this, but this is what has amazed me with the number of things I've seen online where you've had hearings and various other things where we've actually had quite prominent like nurses and things with really strong anti-vax views, which that honestly that amazes me in terms of medical professionals who
Yeah,
are in that camp. And that's
yeah.
all I want to say on it because I don't want to go in
Well,
anyway.
no,
Just
I had a good friend of mine reach out and say his physician was like, "Oh, I wouldn't take these vaccines." But go ahead, John. Yeah,
yeah,
we can wrap up. I do want there's a bullet point here that I think you should talk about, and then
just to
I'll
close
add
it,
in
yes.
because this guy's crazy.
Brandenburg is an admitted conspiracy theorist, who believes he is a prophet and vaccines are a product of the devil. He also professed a belief that the Earth is flat and the 9/11 terrorist attacks were faked. So, yeah, I
I
think there were
mean,
a few
all of
warning
them, right,
tracks on
John?
that guy.
He's got the trifecta. The Earth is flat. 9/11 was fake, and vaccines are the devil, right? So I mean, what else is left out there for conspiracies on things? But good Lord, God bless him. We hope his time served will get his head cleared, and to any, hopefully we can. Hopefully he's really the unicorn, I guess. Not. I hope there aren't a lot of other
Yeah,
people
yeah.
in the pharmacy
Well,
industry who hold these kind of spooky or crazy beliefs, right?
I'm sure he's the exception rather than the rule, but it's still not pleasant when you
Yeah,
do.
but John, you talk about those echo chambers. Somebody's online promoting this stuff.
Sure, absolutely, totally, yeah, yeah.
So, but John, we kind of again
And that's
before there's
just
go
quickly,
ahead.
that's largely why my social media time it's really dropped because I just have got no time for getting anywhere near this kind of stuff because it's yeah, I don't want to go there.
Outside of LinkedIn, I don't do much, John. I
Yeah,
think the
yeah.
other ones are like, my wife might show me something on Facebook. Oh, did you see that? Well, she's not even big into it. We're not big into it. But, John, we're wrapping up our COVID news. We're going to switch over to non-COVID. And, again, I think this next story, I'll preface it by saying I still think cell and gene therapies and
Mhm.
CAR T cell therapies are the wave of the future. But
Yep. Well,
there's
well,
always some setbacks, and
yep.
remember, you're treating people that are a little sick. But a
Yeah.
company called Team Immunity Therapeutics, who's out of the University of Pennsylvania, right? And this is Carl June's company, right? If you recall who
Hmm.
Carl June is at all, but the CAR T cell trial had for solid tumors was stopped after a couple patients died, and somewhat somber, but I do think that these types of things for a variety of reasons, you're treating sick people, or was it the vaccine, was it just the general health of the individual, but kind of put a stop on it. And we're going to report. We're going to be honest with what's out there, but I still think CAR T cells are the wave of the future. And if I was unfortunately, or a family member unfortunately was ever in these positions, I would still highly recommend going this approach as one of your last salvos
Yeah.
towards treating cancers.
If I can just chime in a little bit, I mean, yeah, basically, it was two patients got what they call immunoeffector cell-associated neurotoxicity syndrome, or ICANS. They both died, and it's a known side effect of CAR T therapy in leukemia patients. But where that's actually managed in those patients is managed with IL-6. I totally agree with you, Dominic. I mean, this is cutting edge of where the medical in the pharmaceutical industry is going. This is what people are doing to try and solve medical conditions. There are going to be bumps along the road. It's like that one step forward, two steps back. Well, and it's happened with every mode of research. You whatever you do, you hit roadblocks, and they either change direction, go in a different path, or you figure out how to surmount that problem that you've encountered. I'm sure that the number of people who are working on this issue will find a way around it. It's a reality of pharmaceutical development, but like I say, like you said, with complete sympathy towards the patients and their families. But sadly, this will occasionally happen,
Yeah,
particularly in these
it's
very severe conditions.
yeah. I mean, there's always a cost for greatness or success, but I hope I'm not morbid when I say that. I truly do feel for those families, but they've already designed the second round, right? They're
Hmm.
already improving the CAR T cell
Sure.
to try and reduce this ICANS, your immune factor cell associated neurotoxicity syndrome. That is indeed IL-6. I'm sure there's some other cytokines. And of course, one might think, Regeneron, I think we're going to talk about them in our main topic. They have a variety of antibodies to treat COVID. And one of them, I think, is an anti-IL-6. And I think it is being used in some of these to help prevent that. So you can imagine an anti-IL-6 antibody in conjunction with CAR T cell
Sure. Yep.
could potentially stop it.
Yep.
So, but John, I almost wish there was some way we could memorialize individuals that have, been part of this, because it goes back IL-2 therapies back in the 90s, and
Hmm.
even the initial sort of lentiviral vectors in the 2000s, and now CAR T cell. So, but even you go back to the 50s, if you know the history of chemotherapeutics, they had issues with the right dose and the right potency, and worked their way through it and have saved millions of lives with standard chemotherapeutics over the last 50, 60 years.
Oh,
So
absolutely. Yeah.
I think in our lifetime, CAR T cells, CRISPRs, and things of that nature we're I'm cautiously optimistic these things will be something that could potentially save us, John, right, as we
Oh, I'm
get
good. I'm
into our
convinced of
later
it.
years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but not, it's a little bit somber, but also I hope everybody hears that they've already engineered it to try and fix this. So I want to leave on a positive note. I think,
Yeah. I mean,
this is the road towards success, unfortunately.
So basically, what they've done in this case is look at what the safety issues are, and trying to identify why those might originate, and so they've looked to design another candidate to basically to put into the pipeline instead of this one, and move that one forward in the hope that they can address these issues. That's what, like I said, that's what pharmaceutical development is, and sadly, these things happen every so often. But
Yeah.
I'm convinced this will definitely be the way of the future, like you say.
Yeah. We may see some of these pop up between now, but I think 10 years from now, it'll be
Hmm.
as effective as, chemotherapeutics, are back in the 50s and 60s, where they were life
Yep.
saving.
Yep.
Before we jump off the news, John, where I just want to really briefly touch on this. It'll be coming in weeks to come, but um, w- those that aren't aware, Biogen got approval of a MAB, a monoclonal antibody, and that has really lit up the news outlets. And I'm just staging it for next podcast, John.
Next
But
but one.
that's why it's been such a, I mean, we're going to move off the news, but and we're not even going to talk about any investment stuff, but there's so much going on. Clearly COVID's being lifted, right, John? You can
Mhm.
feel it just with the progression, and even our KCS as a whole, we're feeling just an uptick in demand and so forth. But those that don't know, there was an approval of a drug that's quite controversial, and I'll just tease them with that, right, John?
Yes.
Let's
So
jump into our main topic.
that's likely to be podcast 44 unless we
Yeah.
switch things around. But yeah, certainly we thought it is a really hot topic, but there's likely to be more happening in the next
Oh
couple of
yeah,
weeks.
I mean,
So
John, just
we'll
we'll
leave
take a
it at
moment,
that.
but there must have been 5 op-eds yesterday. Did you see all the
Yep. Yep.
opinions out
Yep.
there on this?
Yep.
And then we're not doing justice to our audience, but one of the committee members resigned. I don't know if you saw that. A
Yes, I
pathologist
did.
was
I
flat out
did.
quit.
Yep.
So fascinating. I mean, these are for us. These are such big news stories, right? These are like blockbuster trades in the sports world for us when these things happen. This
Sure.
is, to me, it was like, oh my goodness, right? I'm
So,
telling my wife, oh, and she's looking at me like, Are you okay?
Yes, I mean this was controversial even until review. So once we went to the review process and all the things that happened there and approval, it's just take gone off to a whole new level. But let's now
Yeah.
move on to the main topic.
Yeah. Exciting stuff, John.
Yep. Yep.
Take us
So
away.
obviously we talk about vaccines a lot, and we thought for the main topic, it'd just be good to just maybe do a quick summary of where we stand with vaccines, and obviously we're all very accepting of the ones that are authorized and for use. But there's some interesting technologies coming through. As I was reading some of the articles ahead of this, I mean, some of the thought that goes into this, it just astonishes me. But just to kick things off, we thought I mean, we obviously know we have the authorized one, particularly in this country, being Pfizer, Moderna. There's J&J, AstraZeneca are elsewhere in the globe, and obviously there's the Sinovac and Sputnik 5 are in other countries too. But in the biggest news on the authorized vaccines is we talked, I think, a couple of weeks ago about how both Moderna and Pfizer have been authorized for 12 to 15-year-olds. Well, both companies are now moving forward with trials in children. So I mean, Pfizer are starting a trial for children 11 years and younger down to around 6 months, running it in the US, Finland, Poland, and Spain, enrolling up to 4,500 children. So it's all this help push towards global immunity, which has to be a good thing. Moderna is also taking a similar approach to, obviously help help move us forward with this and make COVID a thing of the past. So yeah,
Yeah, John, I
great
think
news.
you touched on something that I get. Not only do I get asked about, I'm having to deal with. I have a 15-year-old son, right? So he he didn't want the vaccine, and that was somewhat because of his aversion to needles is really what
Sure.
it's
Yep.
about.
Yep.
And so we did my wife and I did some research, and I think it's the question is it needed, right? And if you're a healthy adolescent child, your risk is really, really low.
Hmm.
And so, and then I think my wife was sort of like, well, he's in those years where he's growing a lot and he's growing a lot. But but if he had wanted it, he would have gotten it. I think we let him make the decision. I must admit, I hope more data gets out and he gets vaccinated here soon. I am a little bit torn by this, but I do think it's a tough decision. One of our marketing team, some of our marketing team, they have very young children. They're probably moving towards them, listening in, like, oh, what's Dom saying here around? Should I vaccinate my 3-year-old or 5-year-old, let alone a 15-year-old? And I, John, I don't have an answer. I'm not even going to try to answer that. I think that becomes family oriented, just like it was for me. But I do think I'll say this: if your child has any sort of underlying health conditions, then I think you should
Yeah.
definitely vaccinate.
Yeah.
That's a no brainer. If you've got a healthy child and you know
I,
hasn't my son hasn't gotten sick, he's been very
mhm.
he's been playing sports and interacting with people a little bit. He still masks up though, John. He does wear a
Sure.
mask when
Yep.
we're out, so he stays healthy. But anyhow,
I,
I'll stop talking and
if I
let you
could,
give some
if
thoughts
I
on it.
could,
But this is
yeah,
a
if I
big
could
that
quickly,
what you just touched on is massive, right?
no,
Like I think we all
absolutely.
agree you're over 18, take a
Yep.
shot.
Yep. Yep.
Under it is still eesh.
Yeah, I think there's enough cases that I mean, if it was if I had kids who are of that age, I would say strongly I would recommend that you get vaccinated. And although it isn't an issue for us with the rest of our families in the UK, but if say my parents were still alive and there was any likelihood of us regularly visiting my parents, I'd say like there's absolutely no choice. I'm making it mandatory, you know.
Yeah, no,
But
I see. Yeah,
I think what I always keep coming back to in this, and we've talked about this multiple times, is the power of vaccination. And if I look at my childhood medical history compared to my children's medical history, the number of childhood diseases that I had because I wasn't vaccinated compared to my children who were vaccinated who had none. And that to me is like that's the difference. So if you have these vaccines available, please take them. It's all I mean at a certain age it's their choice, but I would still be say I would straw as much as possible I'd recommend that you do it, and that's as much as I'm going to say.
yeah, and that's how I feel. I just think at some
Sure.
point when the I think also he was getting a different vaccine. He needed some blood taken, so he was kind of like, I don't want to do it all at once.
Yeah,
But
I think it's important, at a certain age, like 15 or
and,
whatever, that it's somewhat their decision,
yeah,
as,
and here's the other influencer. A lot of his friends are, they have some family or two that are anti-vaxxers,
Mhm.
almost borderline, and I think that's influencing them. I mean, think
Sure.
about it though. You're a kid. You're like, oh, I'm not gonna get sick, and
Yeah, yep,
I'm
yep.
immortal almost, and why would I want the pain or perceived pain? And anyhow, we can move off of that, John. But just it's a very good topic. I feel like it's something I don't know, I get asked all the time about, and even have been asked by like some colleagues, like what should I do? But
Yeah.
anyhow,
We'll
great,
keep
good,
we'll keep revisiting this stuff. So
yeah,
as in terms of our agenda, we thought we'd move on to. I think I had new vaccines in the pipeline as the next one up. And the first of those is second time lucky for Sanofi GSK after passing small mid-stage COVID shot. They're looking for approval by year end. So Sanofi and GSK were a vaccine. Their first vaccine really didn't have sufficient efficacy to merit continued development. So they've gone back to drawing board. They have a new adjuvanted recombinant shot, and it is eliciting strong responses in a phase two. And the test was in 18 to 95-year-old volunteers, 722 in the US and Honduras, but they're showing 90 to 100% zero, 95 to 100% zero conversion in the blood. So they're moving to a phase
yeah,
three. And actually, the other part is this trial was a good ethnic mix,
hmm
so that they're confident about it, and it's become a theme here. They want to go for phase three, 35,000 patients, aiming for authorization by the end of the year. And although we talk right at the beginning, we have vaccines available, we're in a really fortunate position in the US. Any of these vaccines that are coming through have a part to play, because it's not just about the US, it's about the world. And
yeah,
so you know the Pfizer and Moderna can only make so many doses. So if GSK Sanofi come up with a vaccine and they can make doses, and then we've got other ones we're talking about, they can build up out, that helps the whole world's
yeah.
population. So it's all a good thing. So I'll let you comment on this one, Dom.
Yeah, I mean, two big, pharma giants, right? Sanofi and GSK are pharma giants, right? So, not surprising they're still having their hat in the COVID vaccine arena. Not surprised it's succeeding. More traditional vaccines, right? You mentioned
Sure.
recombinants with
Yep.
adjuvants. Good efficacy. I think it's, really, it's what, as you mentioned, this is something that's going to impact the world, right? This is more. They even I think it's great they did within Honduras. They showed a good mix of population, right? So again, it's a great story, and more to be determined here. But I would be surprised if their phase three didn't coast through. Just again, this is more in line with the time it takes for a traditional vaccine to
Yep.
kind of make it to the market. So great story, John, and two titans of pharma impacting the world. Hopefully, they get some good press for it. And with that, let's move on to another couple titans that are working on
So,
some
so
other stuff, right?
this is a little bit more. This isn't so much Titans collaborating as this is the how, not cutthroat. That's not quite the right word, but how.
Competitive, yeah,
Yes,
competitive.
yes, that is exactly the word. So basically, looking for an edge over Merck, Pfizer begins testing its COVID-19 vaccine, a next generation pneumococcal shot together. We've touched on the pneumococcal vaccines in other podcasts. Pfizer, I can't remember the name of it. I had the shot a couple of months ago, but it's actually Pfizer's biggest seller at the moment.
Pneumovax, right? Isn't that's the
Yeah,
name
it's
of
something
it?
like that. Is their pneumonia vaccine, and it's up. I think the current version is active against 13 variants. Merck are developing one that's active against 15. Pfizer I think I've got one in the pipeline that is active against 20.
Yeah,
And so then this relates to what we talked about previously, where there was someone was testing their vaccine in combination with
flu. I think it was
Flu shot.
Nova.
It was.
Yeah.
It was the flu shot. So this
Yep.
is Pfizer taking it a step further to combine it with the pneumonia shot and saying, "Look what we can do, Merck. And how you ever gonna? You're not going to be able to steal the market away from us." So
It's
it
clever.
is very very competitive,
Yeah.
and it's
It's
obviously
very
whatever they
clever.
can do to get that edge.
Yeah, I mean, look, I just said if my son was getting his tetanus shot and it had the COVID vaccine, and he probably would have taken it, right? So so that's no different with anybody who can get pneumococcal, pretty routine. I strongly suggest you get that if you're you know I don't know what age they 55 over 55. I think they were recommended or something over 60. But if that is a brilliant marketing strategy to say to give yourself a competitive edge, I certainly would be all for
Yep.
one shot. I mean, John, who knows? Maybe the sky's the limit. We'll go and get one shot. I'll have COVID, flu, pneumococcal, maybe even some Zostra, all sorts of other things in there. But
Well, so
good story.
this one's been tested in adults 65 and older, so we have a few years before we have to worry about this
Yeah.
one. So,
Oh, it is okay. It says 65. Um, yeah, but that seems to be closer than anyway. Let's move on. But
yeah,
no, good story there. I do think
yeah,
the
absolutely. And this one was really more from a financial perspective, but it's actually a company we haven't discussed at all. It's a company called Valneva, and the headline was Valneva's not too late in COVID-19 as analysts eye 1.1 billion in 2022 vaccine sales. So Valneva, who actually, I'll be honest, is a name I'm not familiar with. They're a French company, but they will if if their vaccine is authorised, it's in phase 3. It will be the only European-made inactivated adjuvanted coronavirus candidate that has undergone clinical testing in the region. So it's seen within Europe as having some sort of advantage because of that. So they think if it does get authorised, it will become the leading shot in Europe. And it actually is a theme that Europe's rollout of the vaccine has been poor. And again, it ties back to the
yeah.
French story of the vaccine suspicion. And again, we talked about this weeks ago how France there was like a blow to national pride because so far their vaccine developments hadn't been a
Yep.
success, and it hit the national psyche. So if this does go through, then this might actually get France more on board with getting vaccinated.
Well,
So you can see where this comes from in terms of why there's the market there. So it
interesting.
has good safety. I think it has. It doesn't require cold chain storage. So the number of factors about it that again says it has a niche, and certainly it has a market that other vaccines haven't necessarily tapped yet.
Yeah. Well, John, I mean, you touched on all the good parts there around it's the advantages of it. I'll just give a little bit. It is a CPG, which is a toll-like receptor adjuvant that they got from Dynavax is who they're working with this Valneva. I had not heard of them either. I'm sure but they seem to be a very big French company. I think you also hit on how the French as a whole, their pride, the people at the Pasteur Institute are happy to see that they're making some movements, I'm sure, to help with their country. But I think one of the things, John, is, think about this. We couldn't find toilet paper on the shelves during early COVID stages. I think people are going to stockpile these vaccines. And this one is much more attractive because it has that long shelf life. So
Sure.
I know that sounds crazy, but you can imagine that there are probably governmental people just sitting there going, even state by state here in the US, I'm sure people are like, lobbying and petitioning to get as many vaccines as they possibly can for their constituents. And this just seems to be a big part of at least they kind of emphasize it here, that the stockpiling would be, and then that's a whole nother.
Yeah, I
John,
mean,
I hope, I think that's what we keep talking about, this crusade to vaccinate the world, because that's really how we'll remedy this, or at least, kind of abate it. The stockpiling is counter to that, right?
yep,
What's
yep,
the point of stockpiling it?
yep.
Those vaccines might not be good a year from now, right?
Exactly. Yeah. 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 So, yes, I mean, we know, we talked before about, there was, I think Canada had more doses than it could use,
Yeah.
very early on, yeah, it's human nature, isn't it? This is
Yeah.
you're
Yeah. Yeah.
obviously
It is.
coming for
You want
human
to
nature
squirrel
to
it
do the
away,
right
right?
thing.
Squirrel
Yes.
it away.
Yes. Yes.
Before we move off of the vaccines, there was one other. Oh boy, I lost it. There was another vaccine that I
Well, we
wanted
do
to
actually we
touch
do
on.
actually hop back to vaccines. So, if
Okay,
it comes
well
back to,
let's just move on with the agenda, right? Let's
let's
go on
just
to other. Yeah,
quickly touch on antibodies, because there has been some movement there. I mean, antibodies, really, we don't talk too much about because they're really applicable in a hospital setting, and vaccines are obviously much more news in terms of getting people inoculated to continue life as normal. Antibodies, their application has very much been in terms of helping sick patients, so they're not quite as high profile. But things are changing in that field too. Do you want to start on Regeneron?
sure. Yeah, we talked about Regeneron. They have this antibody cocktail, right? Like, so this is just so we know, this is still in that therapeutic space, right, John? That's what these are for, right?
Yep.
And so they have there's what is it, up to 70% efficacy? Is that what I'm reading here? And I know the big competitor is Lilly,
Yep.
and Regeneron appears to have the edge. They're kind of winning there, I think, or maybe they're kind of
But
passing Lilly.
I think the gist of this is that we don't actually talk. The articles don't talk too much about Lilly, but the news with Lilly is they were the first ones to have a antibody approved, but then that struggled with a couple of the newer variants. Then Lilly had an antibody cocktail that was still effective against those variants, but it's actually starting to stumble against newer variants again, even their cocktail, and so, it already been stopped being used in Illinois and Massachusetts, and six further states have also wound down use of the Lilly antibody cocktail. So
Yeah,
there's a need for other companies out there. So in
yeah,
this case, Regeneron's cocktail hasn't shown any issues. It seems to deal with other variants, but they had a trial where they were looking at lower doses, so it obviously spread the supply, and also subcutaneous injection rather than a drip, rather than intravenous, to make it quicker and easier for patients. And it was approved on both fronts. So it really gives the Regeneron antibody cocktail a leg up to
yeah.
be that standard of care.
Couldn't come at a better time, right? As
Yeah,
you mentioned,
exactly.
the Lilly seems to have faltered in several states, and on the heels of within a week of that sort of bad news, right? That was the leading candidate for, if I'm a physician and I got someone
Sure.
who's in
Yeah.
late stage COVID, that's what I'm trying to grab. And now Regeneron's emerged. But John, as you know, there's a lot of other therapeutics.
Yep.
We're working on several of them, but
Yeah.
good,
There's
despite the
what,
hiccup with
so,
Lilly, I still think Regeneron moving forward is great. And I wouldn't be surprised if Lilly figures it out, right?
Yep.
They're a giant.
Absolutely, and yeah, because they're collaborating with any number of different companies. But actually, as a part of that, there is. I mean, Regeneron isn't the only player in town, because the FDA has authorized the Vir GSK
Yeah.
antibody that we talked about, and this has been shown to be 85% effective at preventing hospitalization in high risk newly diagnosed COVID-19 patients. So, it's basically the numbers in that terms. That you talked about the 70% efficacy of the Regeneron, the Vir efficacy is actually higher than that. So,
Mhm.
this is likely to be, it's another weapon again in
Yeah.
dealing with this, but really obviously helping a vulnerable population.
And I
And
think it's in, oh, go ahead.
just one last thing on that. Vir basically said that their as from their testing, their antibody, it's a single antibody rather than a cocktail, but it has dealt with all the variants that we've seen so far.
Yeah, no, good stuff. And I think your one thing I want to highlight that you talked about is the dosage is lower. So Regeneron now has like a million doses ready by this quarter, and then another 1.25 million next quarter, which is great news, right? So,
Yep.
but I think people have a sense that COVID's kind of over. The reality is I don't know if it's ever going to be over, but the good news is there should be a supply of therapeutics to hopefully prevent any sort of fatality. So good stuff there, John. And Regeneron obviously is a big player in this space, and really it seems like they've kind of jumped ahead in the therapeutic space. And with that, the next topic, right, is let's
Next,
move on
next
to,
generation.
yeah, good stuff. Tell us, I think our friends at CuraVac are involved with this one, right?
So CureVac currently have one. So let's just say prepping the next generation of COVID vaccines and treatments is the article. It focuses on CureVac and a company called Memo, who again Memo Therapeutics, who we haven't touched on. And I was Anyway, CureVac currently are one of the two with Novavax are one of two candidates that are in late phase 3. Certainly looking at articles in early May, they were expecting a readout on CureVac's data pretty soon, but it hasn't happened yet. I think the current candidate it had shown lesser efficacy against the South African variant, whichever Greek alphabet letter that is, I don't know yet. So there is a little bit concern about the current CureVac candidate, although it's an mRNA. It's stable at
Yeah.
room temperature. So again, in all this, you caveat to say if it's authorized, there will be a niche where it can fill in gaps that
Hmm.
Pfizer, Moderna, and others can't cover. So anyway, their new one, again, they've they've ch- looked at it with a different mRNA backbone. They're actually collaborating with GSK on this, and this all sprung out of the fact that GSK offered to manufacture the previous CureVac shot, so now they're working together on developing a new one. And again, it's they're working on this to improve the mRNA stability and prolonging expression of the SARS-CoV-2 protein and spike protein, and improving the immune response. So it's so far in early stages with animals, it's showing significant efficacy, and looks like it really does have potential. So that's the CureVac, and I'll
Yeah.
let you
Yeah.
chime
So,
in.
John, I'm going to highlight there's a couple things. One, it's temperature, doesn't need the cold chain. So, advantage there. You just touched on they've improved the vaccine to try to improve the immune response. So, meaning longer lasting, prolonged immunity is where they're going. And then in their early rat studies, they've shown that a double regimented dose can neutralize all these different variants that are being reported across the world. So, really,
Actually,
it's a good one.
interestingly, this that they tested against variants from Denmark, UK, South Africa, and all the animals except for the rats that got the lowest dose were fully protected after just one shot.
Yeah.
So this where we've been looking at all the mRNA so far are definitely dose regimens. This may again have an additional advantage that
Yeah.
it's down to a one shot.
But that doubles the supply, right, John? We keep hammering on
Exactly.
that, and
Yeah.
and more importantly, it's the first one preclinically. It says here the first vaccine that took first mRNA that was effective after a single dose, but it was one of the few that had gone across all these variants. So it's very
Sure.
promising.
Yep. So moving on to Memo, and they have a really interesting approach. This is a Swiss-based company, Memo Therapeutics, and they reported that their treatment MTX slash hyphen Covab, which is so this is the interesting piece, is derived from patients who recovered from COVID-19 and is effective against the original strain of the virus as well as the UK variant. And I was like, wow, so what? There's lots of lots of
Yeah,
vaccines.
your convalescent
But
plasma is that, right?
actually,
Like, so go on. Yeah.
so it's actually the interesting piece is what the potential for this. So I'm just going to read it because it's easier. Memo uses single cell molecular cloning and screening system to identify MTX COVID in a matter of weeks. And it also used the technology to discover a very promising antibody candidate against the South African variant. By taking this approach, they're hoping that they can really flex. So if they get hit with a new variant, they can flex very quickly to a
Hmm.
new vaccine, and that's where Memo may have the advantage here.
Yeah, I
We've
think
got
they're trying. Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I just very quickly summarize this. what we've had today are vaccines that are authorized, and it's the hope that they will still be efficacious against a new variant. Memo are actually coming at us from the point of view of, we have this, it's effective against this variant. If another variant hits, we just have a little tweak and we move and we're effective against
Yeah.
that. So it's an interesting approach, and I'll let
It
you go
is.
with
They're just. I think what they're doing is they're trying to have herd immunity through engineering, right?
Yes.
They're trying to take a naturally produced antibody, and that's brilliant, right? So people who have remedied COVID, that has all sorts of powerful antibodies circulating through them, and people have tried to make convalescent plasma out of it, or tried to isolate them and treat, and people are still doing that, and it's been a mixed bag of success. But this is that predictive element. This is that step further. They're really trying to look within that area, and really, I imagine they're using some AI to sort of try to like engineer herd immunity.
Yep.
Great stuff,
Yep. Yep.
awesome stuff.
Yep.
So, John, I knew we had a jam packed show. Let's get cracking. I think we got about 3 or 4 more items. I don't know if we're going to get to all of them.
We got 3, but we can be brief. I think
Yeah,
this is in. So I'll just touch on this one. The headline is a DNA COVID-19 vaccine delivered with the help of electrical pulse shows early promise. So this is one that's very early in development, and it's at Taiwan's National Health Research Institute. They've developed a DNA COVID-19 vaccine, so DNA hasn't really gone anywhere, and part of the reason is it's they've in terms of administration to human,
yeah. We don't
there's,
generate a response against
there's,
DNA. I'll
there's
help you out. Yep.
and there's poor
Yeah.
penetration into cells, which is partly behind this. So the technology behind this is, you use electroporation, which uses an electrical pulse to open up temporary pores in the cell membrane to allow the vaccine's DNA material to pass through and penetrate the cells. So this is in animals. It shows. I was reading this thinking, well, it shows potential in animals, but DNA vaccines work in animals anyway. It's the big test is still to come as to whether this approach is feasible for humans or not. Although,
It's
sorry, go on.
it's a fascinating approach they're taking to overcome the challenges with DNA vaccines. They are, you can imagine your body is not designed to generate antibodies against DNA. That would be very bad, right? So internalizing it is one way to break tolerance. I'm not Immunologists love the word tolerance. It's still hard to define what I just said there, but so that's basically what it's trying to do, is put some activation energy through this electroporation. It sounds great, John, but this one,
Well,
this one, I'm a little less like that. I don't know if I want to be electroporated to get a
sure.
vaccine, but
And
hey,
it's
that's off to them.
It's interesting because the article actually mentioned Inovio, who were talked about very early on. They're taking the same approach. Inovio, like, they lost US funding because we already had enough authorized, and there was concern about their electroporation device. So I mean it will. I don't know if this will go anywhere or not. It's just an
Yeah.
interesting thing.
It was a great. No, I think there's so many. The blending of technologies is why you brought it up. That's the whole
Yep.
point
Yep.
of today's. This is what we're trying to educate our audience. There's just more and more. So, speaking of which, how about a plant-derived vaccine,
Yes.
John, right?
Yeah, I mean, if we've tried everything else, let's go with plants. And this is not knocking it. It's just amazing what other people do. This is a company called Medicago, who are actually collaborating. Again, it's just funny how often GSK are popping up on these later
Yeah, they got all the
big
manufacturing for it,
vaccines.
right?
So with plant-based manufacturing, GSK partner Medicago takes COVID-19 vaccine production into the greenhouse, and they have got good mid-phase data on this vaccine already, so it's moving forward. But the key to this is, the vaccine is actually produced using the leaves of Nicotiana benthamiana, a close relative of the tobacco plant, and as bioreactors to produce the shots antigens. So they have their selling point they see is basically it'll be quick, versatile, and they can scale it because obviously plants are if you have the ground to plant more and more plants to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll let you.
Well, I mean,
I'm gonna.
I think you touched on it. It's a virus-like particle that they're growing in a form of a tobacco plant. So you're right. The amount you can generate is very high. It's rapidly growing. You can make quite a bit. It's easy to isolate from them, and seems to be pretty effective. They claim they have some T cell immunity. Some of it maybe they talk about IF and gamma, which is great, but they're also seeing some IL-4, which doesn't always mean great for T
Sure.
helper 1 response, as they indicate in this article. But no, John, I think this is just one of those
Yeah.
stories where, hey, people are doing great science out there, and if you don't know about the history of tobacco plants, and they were a big part of the advancement of viral aggression as well as viral vaccines. I'm not going to go down the history of it, but tobacco has been used historically, and yet another case of somebody leveraging that history.
Yep. So I think it would be nice to talk about how it's done, etc. But we should move on in the
Yeah.
interest of time. And just the last piece, we thought we'd talk about look into the future. It obviously we know there's a lot of work out there, but actually, this is BARDA looks to get the jump on next pandemic with VCR targeting transformative technology. So BARDA, which is the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, is actually launching a VC fund to investigate technologies that could be deployed against future outbreaks or other public health emergencies. This is something that's been discussed for years and it never went anywhere, but it's now finally moving forward. And so they've committed 10 million this year, 50 million over the next 5 years, and they hope to raise over 500 million over the next decade, and in partnership with private companies as well. But I like this from the perspective that people are starting to think ahead. We are. It feels like we're coming through this, and the light is at the end of the tunnel. But ultimately, we have to be thinking if something like this occurred again, how would we react? And
Yeah.
that's the gist of it, and that's why I
Yeah,
like it.
there's worse ways to spend government dollars than to have a slush fund for pandemic or vaccine development, right? So that's basically what I think I read.
Oh,
But
sure.
that's what my take from this is. It's like you call it a VC, a slush fund. Maybe I'm insulting somebody with that, but it's great. It's a good way to spend dollars for sure, and it's not just government dollars. There's a lot of outside dollars as well. But this is why you love living in not just the U.S. but in more advanced countries. We're fortunate, we're blessed that we can try to be more proactive. And it sounds like this had kind of come to conception 5 years ago, and due to what's happened over the last few years, it just makes it a slam dunk now, right? And they talk about Gates Foundations being involved. I don't think
I think
BARDA will never be short of money,
yeah,
in my opinion.
the comment of the Gates Foundation was basically it sort of wants to follow the similar path to the
Got it.
Gates Foundation. So it's a similar kind of approach. And again, this is something where is there ever too much money to throw at something like this? Because honestly, public health is it's you want to be investing to make things people live better, etc., etc. So yeah, I'm all in favor of this kind of stuff.
Yeah, John, that kind of brings us to the end of our main topic, and we to me we covered a lot of ground. I think it's been a really jam-packed show, but there's in terms of we're still just scratching the surface.
Sure.
I think what I'll share is, I got to be careful how I cage this comment. There are a lot of other therapeutic um, COVID treatments that the public isn't probably privy to, but I want everybody to sleep a little better at night knowing that there are some great drugs that we at KCS have the pleasure or um, good fortune of working on, that are not just you know like Regeneron's therapeutics. There's a lot of other therapies out there that can treat COVID that are being worked on. So, and
Oh,
we love doing those drug development things. We got a couple that are really vamping up. Some of them are more towards early stage, and some of them are towards the later stage. But all of them focus on key players within the immune system and trying to shut them down. So, therapeutic wise, great. The vaccine front's great. I mean, John, I hope everybody, despite some dark news, I think really when it comes to COVID, it's not over. People should continue to try and social distance. If you're not vaccinated, wear a mask. If you maybe wear a mask even if you are vaccinated in certain settings. But for sure, John, each week it seems like we're moving more and more in the right direction, undoubtedly.
Agreed, definitely. Yes, yes.
And,
So I
and,
mean,
and then I'll end with
to the
one of the things too. Last comment is the amount of collaboration between large pharma is amazing. It is so cool to read that, John. That struck me throughout this podcast. It's like these things would have never happened pre-pandemic, and the pace of scientific advancement is just it's moving faster than it ever has in our lifetime.
Oh yeah, it is definitely. I mean, for all that it knocked other things, sideways, it has made being part of the part of the support of the pharmaceutical industry a really fantastic place to be, and just yeah, it's made the last year or 14 15 months absolutely fascinating. So yeah, I think there'll be a lot of lessons learned within the pharmaceutical industry, and so I think our lives are still going to
Yeah.
continue to be very interesting for
No,
years to come.
there's no end in sight.
Yeah,
Even when the pandemic is sort of remedied, and I don't know, I don't like the idea of waiting for the next pandemic. That's going to drive me nuts. I don't like that. That's a fearful way to live. But what I'm saying, I don't think the collaboration will go down, John. I think this is going to help with immuno-oncology. It's going to help with orphan disease status. I think it's just I think there's a general light being shined on. Hey, we don't have to be. I don't want to say greedy, that might not be the right word, but it doesn't have to be so siloed, and we
sure.
can collaborate. John, I think we're going to move over to some feedback and some questions, right? So I don't know about one question that I've had a couple from is, and we talked about this a little bit. It's due to do you vaccinate your child? And that's a fascinating question and one that's near and dear to me. But that is something I get from a few different colleagues, even friends, and even some dilemma within my own house when it comes to vaccinating my child who's 15. So, John, it's a topic that I think a lot of people worry about. I think even our producers who have some young children are wondering, do I vaccinate my, forget 15, how about my 3, 5, 7 year old, right? So, John, I don't know the answer to that. I have my thoughts on it, but it's something that, as a pro-vaccine individual, I'm probably for.
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic, and I'm sure there'll be continued discussion on that. So I think that's the last of our feedback. So I think it's time to close up. Is that
Yeah.
okay?
What an exciting podcast 42, John. So you want to tell us a little bit about 43, although I don't know if we have we're going to talk about
Well,
cell and gene therapies regardless. I just don't know if we're going to leave a little teaser. I don't know if our guest is going to make it, but I do think we should
so,
make that
s-
topic. Go ahead.
yes. Well, we can either, if that next time doesn't work, can always flip it and do
Yeah. But
do
we're
the
excited.
Biogen. Yeah.
John, it's hard to believe it's podcast 43 already, but as we're winding down here, John, what's the key question? It's a thirsty Thursday. We're recording on a Thursday. What John, it's blazing hot here in Kansas City. Oh my
Uh,
goodness.
it,
The mercury is rising where, it's 90s, humidity. It's tough
well,
to jog anytime during the day or even do anything outside. So that might preclude what I'm doing, but I'll let you tell me a little. I got some fun plans for Friday night, but what are you up to this weekend?
so I don't know if you want to broadcast this or not, but I'll leave this to Jeremy to decide. But I don't know if I mentioned a couple of weeks ago I went for my annual physical, and they took blood, and I got a call on Monday morning to say, well, we've got your results and we're a little bit concerned about your blood sugars, so we're slightly worried about pre-diabetes, so time for you to change your diet, which basically means no starch, no fat, no sugars, only lean proteins, no carry out, cut down on alcohol, and I can't remember the other thing, but it was plenty of. And I just said, "Can you please send this to me in electric? Because I'll never remember." So I also said, "You're really trying to make my life miserable here, aren't you? You're taking all the way the things I enjoy." So it's actually it's a it's not a wake up call. It's actually a good time to take stock. And so I've spent the last couple of days thinking, okay, I can cut this out, cut this out, cut this. That's pretty easy. Oh yeah. The other thing was exercise for 30 minutes every day. That was I was thinking it was one of the other PCs. So I'm now but in menu planning mode and in really flipping what I tend to cook. So again, to go back to another, we finally have our ovens installed. So when those were installed last week, I was all excited about all the stuff I was going to cook. Now I'm going to cook a lot of stuff that's completely different, but the ovens are still going to be pulled into service. So so this is what it's about. I actually I had to go into Ithaca to pick up my car because I did some stuff last night and left it there. Stopped off at the supermarket, got some fish. So I'm actually planning a bunch of fish dishes this weekend. So this is going to be my next few weeks before a blood test, and see. Hopefully, it'll all be back down under control, and I can go back to my previous disgusting lifestyle.
Yeah. So, John, I hear you. I think this is something that everybody, as they get to a certain point in life, starts to struggle with. And so, my suggestion is bump your exercise up to an hour and eat whatever you want, because that's what I'm doing. No, so I hear you. I definitely.
So, so
Agree.
if from that perspective, there's no rush for me to come over to Kansas because I can't eat your pizza because obviously that's off my list.
Yeah, John, I got this gluten-free dough, and we can make you one that you can still eat. My uni haven't had a chance, but I think that there is a possibility I'm going to take some time this weekend to use that. I've been eating a lot healthier, John. Really been trying to. You mentioned some fish, and been eating just portion control, and in general, just my son's on a big health kick. He's lifting 6 days a week and really wants to eat healthy. He's all into like protein and all this good stuff. So that's been great. And then I'm thinking about doing another like a triathlon. So I'm
Oh
kind of
wow!
yeah. I think this. I've been swimming a lot, so that's not a problem. I can swim a couple miles now. I think yesterday I swam about a mile and a half, and then did a 15-mile bike ride pretty seamlessly, although a cable popped on my bike, so that's getting fixed as we speak. I should be able to pick it up. And then it's the jogging, John. I mean, I can jog, but man, am I slow. But I jogged 3 miles the other day. It just takes forever. So I'm thinking maybe Saturday morning I get up early and do my own little mini version of it. Might, bike to the pool, swim, throw my change in the locker room, hop on my bike, bike a few miles, and then go down to a track, change shoes, and run around the track. So a mini, but we'll see if I get adventurous around that. But John, I do all of that so I can eat whatever I want, which is
Sure.
hilarious, right?
Yeah.
But I feel you though. I
I mean,
definitely.
honestly, we eat relatively healthy, but I
Yeah.
am horribly prone to snacks, and I love potato chips. So it's just
Yeah, those are,
it's just
for me, it's portion size.
it's,
I'll eat 4 ounces
it's
of chicken and then I'll eat four more, which is
yeah,
typical.
yeah. It's a good time to take stock and,
Yeah.
just see how it works out. And
And
like
I
I say,
think
it's
summer's the best time, right? The
it's
fruits, the
been
vegetables, it's all good.
yeah, it's been interesting to like come at looking at recipe books and coming at them from a completely different perspective, but quite exciting in terms of I can do this, 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 and this. So yeah, I'm good with it. In
Yeah.
terms of getting up, Saturday morning I have to get up early as well because it's the first of the two record store days this year. So yeah, June 12th I'll be up at the crack of dawn, so I'm one of the first people queuing to get the few items I want
Yeah.
for this record
You,
store day, and yeah.
you reminded me of something. I was at a record store last weekend in Lawrence. We went up to Lawrence went to a pretty eclectic little brewery called Fields and Ivy, had some good food. And then we went down to the main street down near KU, and they had a record store down there. My son picked up something, so I thought of you when I did that. But I'm going to see a play, and Mamma Mia is being put on by a local production group, and it's outside at a small venue not too far from our facility in Shawnee. And my wife and I bought some tickets, and we're going with another couple, and you bring some chairs and a picnic basket, and bring your own little wine. And so I'm kind of looking forward to that, even though there's a 40% chance of rain. We'll just bring up big old umbrella.
Yeah, you'll be fine.
Yeah, we'll do it. But that's my excitement for this weekend. Gonna go see. Have never seen Mamma Mia. Didn't know ABBA. Didn't even know ABBA was the music to it. If my wife's excited, I'm excited.
I think at least with the movie, I lasted about 10 minutes, and I'm like,
right.
I've had enough. I'm not too great with musicals. I have to that, which was longer than I lasted with Sweeney Todd. I think I lasted about 2 minutes on that.
Maybe you'd like La La Land. I think that's funny. I don't know if you made it through that, but no, John. I think that's a wrap. I mean, very excited. Great show. Thanks for everything, and looking forward to podcast 43.
Yeah, have a great weekend. I mean, we'll look forward to talking next week.